Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today I would like to show you how I run BOSSK. So since the release of the new expansion, there's been several different ways of featuring BOSSK, and I've showed in this channel a list of BOSSK which was very aggressive, really trying to overwhelm the opponent, capitalize on BOSSK ability. Um, Now that I've played a little bit more with Bosque, I found out that it was not necessarily the easiest way to run him. Bosque, as an aggressive deck, can be very impressive and can do very powerful things. But at the end of the day, if you do not get your bounties at the right moments, you can end up in a lot of trouble. So I've decided to switch gear and play a deck that was a little bit more consistent while still capitalizing on Bosque qualities, and I found that the ramp version of Bosque was not as dependent on drawing those bounty cards, but was still capable of doing the very powerful things that the Bosque aggro can do. So here I'm running Bosque with green simply because even though it is possible to run Bosque with yellow and there's some powerful bounties, the most powerful bounties available in Shadows of the Galaxies are in green, which limits really the options of what kind of different color combination you can run with Bosque. Really, Bosque green, in my opinion, is by far the strongest one, and is also the one that capitalized the most on the double trigger from Bosque. So before going into the list, I'm going to go into more details of how Bosque ability works. So his ability is free, deals 1 damage to a unit with a bounty, and if you want, you can give +1 attack to this unit for this phase. So the main thing about this is just a ping that is effectively free, that you're going to be using on bounty unit in order to make bounty unit easier to kill. It's a pretty decent ability, but it is not like necessarily the most powerful. Um, you can potentially also use it on your own unit to buff them, but this is something that you extremely rarely do. We do not run any card with bounty natively, so this is only something we would use if an opponent is playing a bounty on one of our cards. But anyway, this is a very extremely rare ability. The important part of the ability is the damage on unit with bounties. And I think the main asset of this unit is not only does he have a pretty interesting and pretty powerful ability, but he also has a very decent body. Comes out as 4/6 for 5, which is a very decent stats. It's almost the best stats in the game if you ignore Boba collecting the bounty, which is at 4/7 for 5. But 4/6 for 5 is really very good stats. And not only is 4/6 for 5 very decent, also the ability becomes a lot more powerful, as whenever you collect the bounty, you get to collect it again. So you basically collect twice the bounty whenever you collect a bounty, which is extremely powerful with the bounty that we run in our deck. And we're really going to try to emphasize and use and abuse that part of the ability as much as possible. So we want bounties that are helpful, but we want bounties that basically get really a lot more powerful when they get doubled by Bosque. So the deck I've decided to run with Bosque is a very simple Vader deck that in which I replaced some of the cards in order to add the bounty package to go with Bosque in it. So it is very similar to those Vader lists that I've been running previously. And Vader Ramp got a lot of very powerful tools in this new expansion, notably Create a Dragon, which is an incredibly powerful late game card for the deck. Kylo Type Silencer is really helping the deck in space. There's just a bunch of great stuff that the deck got, but the problem with Vader Red and the way it runs in this current meta is like it's gonna suffer a lot against a number of different things, and notably it's still gonna struggle against aggro, maybe a little bit less than before thanks to TIE Silencer, but still gonna struggle a little bit, and it's still gonna have a pretty bad matchup against like Boba Fett's armor really is a big deal for the deck, and I think Rival's Fall is also another card that is really bad for Vader because you have such an expensive leader, and when this expensive leader gets killed by Rival's Fall, it feels very bad. So I thought so maybe building the same core of the deck, building a ramp Bosque deck very similar to the ramp Vader deck, but instead of Vader playing Bosque, would have a numbers of different qualities. And one of those qualities is that first of all, you do not get blown out by Rival's Fall nearly as much because you have a relatively cheap leader. And the second main asset is like it allows you to get yourself to interact much easier against aggro because now you have a leader that can deploy early on in the game, which really does help tremendously against aggro. And not only that, there's also a lot of powerful synergies that Bosque has that you, notably with Price on Your Head, which is one of the new ramp cards we have. If we can get a double ramp using Price on Your Head with Bosque, it can really ramp us tremendously. So we're basically playing this Vader deck. We're sacrificing a little bit of our late game because obviously Bosque is not as powerful as Vader as a leader, but we are making our early game stronger, and we're also integrating some very powerful synergies that when they go off can really put us on the stage. But as I said earlier, this deck does not rely on bounty to function. This deck can completely function without bounty, just simply using Bosque as a 4/6 for 5. It's going to come earlier and allows us to set up some early barrage that we cannot really set up with a regular Vader deck. So it is very much what the approach that I've decided to take. So now that you understand, you have a global understanding of what the deck is trying to do. Obviously, it is very much a ramp deck. We're playing 9 ramps in total. We're going to be interacting with our opponent early on, using a lot of removals to keep ourselves afloat, and at the same time try to ramp into those very powerful late game cards, and then we get over the game with those very powerful late game cards, Vaders, Reinforcement Walkers, Palpatines, and obviously the brand new Krayt Dragon. So without further ado, let's go into the card by card analysis. And starting off with the Bounty Hunter Quarry, which in my opinion is the best bounty card that has been printed in this set. And it is specifically powerful with Bosque because of the double trigger. Once, if Bosque is deployed and you get to trigger twice, you get to put 2 units that cost 3 or less into the battlefield. And we do have a lot of very strong cards that cost 3 or less, because turns out having unit that cost 3 or less synergize very well with our Vaders. So what unit 3 or less can we possibly grab with a Bounty Hunter Quarry? We can stabilize the board with a phase 3 Dark Troopers to kind of, with the Sentinel, we can get some Super Laser Technician if we want to ramp further. If we want to have some space presence, we can get Punishing Ones. And of course, the 2 drops are not terrible. Even getting like a Seasonal Short Troopers at 4/3 is not a bad thing either. So it's just a very, very simple, powerful card in this deck that really allows us to take over the board. And even if you only get 1 trigger with Bounty Hunter Quarry, it remains a very solid card because you pay 1 and you get a 3 resources card out of it. And obviously, thanks to the amount of removal event that we play in the deck, combined with Bosque ability that allows us to ping, it is relatively easy to kill almost anything with this card. Next we got Stolen Land Speeder. So this card at the beginning really sounded like to be just a very specific sideboard card in order to basically deal with decks that don't really run any units or run very few units. And then this is a way to kind of give them a unit that we can put bounty on it, and then we can trigger and get a bunch of bounty out of it. But after playing with the card quite a bit, I found out that this is so much more than that. This card is simply just straight up just a good card to play on turn 1, because you're going to be playing it on turn 1, you're going to use Bosque ability to ping in once, and then on the turn after you'll be able to ping in once more. So basically you get a 4/3 for 1 with very little effort. You're going to take 3 damage because very likely your opponent will attack you once with it before he gets to die. But this is still a very cheap, like, deal yourself 3 damage, get a 4/3 for 1 is still something that is very valuable. And obviously there's the fact that you can very easily attach to it a Bounty Hunter Quarry or another 1 resources card in order to basically blow it up and get a bunch of value from it. So basically the turn 1 Land Speeder plus a Bounty Hunter Quarry is just a very solid turn 1. Once again, even if you go like Stolen Land Speeder, ping it, and then turn 2 you play a Price on Your Head on the Stolen Land Speeder, and then kill the Stolen Land Speeder, get a 4/3 and ramp at the same time. This is just a very, very good, those are like pretty solid interaction that are fairly easy to set up. So it is something that I personally find to be quite powerful. And And obviously this card also has the main advantage of being a great card against control, as it allows us to use our bounty even though our opponent doesn't really play any units. So just a very solid card. The 4/3 then becomes very powerful with Barrage, a good card for Barrage and stuff like that. Then we got the good old Seasoned Shore Trooper, which I still think is a classic in a control deck. Yes, not a great card in the early stages of the game, but it does become 4/3 relatively quickly in this deck as we run a lot of ramp. It's an excellent card to grab even from Vader or even Bounty Hunter Quarry. And it's a card that is a low investment card you can play early on, the opponent doesn't deal with it, becomes a 4/3, and our overall barrage becomes a lot better. So so then we got Kylo TIE Silencer. We don't really care too much about the discardability, it's a nice thing. This is the main purpose of this card, is just to be early interaction to deal with enemy space units. This card is excellent at dealing with the opponent A-Wings, the opponent, all the 3 health space units that you're going to see. Really, really good card to interact with those, as well as putting some pressure. I think, in my opinion, Kylo TIE Silencer is an auto-include in almost every red-black decks. It's not a card that is necessarily like super flashy or super powerful, but it just sees plays everywhere because it turns out that 3/2 for 2 in space, in villainy, is a very big deal. Price on Your Head is obviously one of the most important cards of the set. Not only is it a ramp card, but it's also a ramp that has synergies with our leader. Phase 3 Dark Trooper, obviously we're going to try to, our job at the beginning of the game is mostly to survive, so this is why we need Sentinels that are going to be blocking the board. It's a card that is an excellent pickup from Bounty Hunter Quarry and from Vader. Punishing One is another card, so that is good to get from Vader or Bounty Hunter Quarry. It gives us presence in space, and whenever a unit that is as an upgrade get defeated, you get to untap and attack again with it again. This is a card that mostly kind of makes people want to play an aggro deck because it's mostly kind of an aggressive card. But to be quite fair, this card is just as good in a more defensive deck. It just has excellent stats, and the ability is just very relevant. So definitely a good card for this deck. Super Laser Technician, of course, all our regular ramp package is good. Press on Your Head is good, but it remains situational, and sometimes we just simply want to have some good old ramp. The deck is extremely consistent at getting his ramp because we play both Super Laser Technician and Resupply. To get more protection in space, we run 2 copies of Imperial Interceptor, another classic. The deck is quite vulnerable in space. It can be quite vulnerable in space in some situations, so because we don't really run any space unit outside of our we don't really run any space units outside of the Punishing One and the TIE Silencer, so we need a bit more guarantees and protections in space with that. So Interceptor helps with that. Then there's basically a massive jump in the curve. The deck does not really need to be super curve focused because obviously we're going to be jumping and skipping steps with the ramp, going from 4 to 5, 3 to 5, 3 to 6. So we don't really need to play on curve all the time. We still play, of course, the Overrun Barrage and the Traitorous here on curve 5. So that's why we can afford to have massive gaps in the curve, is because we can simply jump from one to another very easily using ramp. So obviously Vader is excellent in this deck as it allows us to search for both Phase 3 Dark Troopers and Punishing Angels are just excellent cards to get. In a deck that is a bit more aggressive, I prefer to play Darth Maul, but in this deck, Vader I think is more appropriate. And is really kind of a slower ramp deck, and in this context, I think Vader makes a lot more sense. Palpatine, of course, the late game ultimate stabilizer. If you're playing a red-black ramp deck and you don't play Palpatine, you're doing it wrong. It still remains, in my opinion, one of the best 8-drop in the game. Just the ultimate game stabilizer for any ramp deck. So Palpatine is the board stabilizer. Walker is our life stabilizer, mostly against a deck that has ability to deal out of hand damage when we're very low in HP. Whereforce Walker is going to put ourselves out of danger against 4 cause, I believe in, with the healing. And with, as I said, a very large body as well. We only play 2 copies of Reinforcement Walker because I feel like he's a bit more specialized than the other one, but still remains a very solid card in any ramp deck. And obviously the great start of ramp deck, the huge massive upgrades of red-green ramp decks in Shadow of the Galaxy is obviously Grey Dragon. Um, in my opinion, one of the best finisher in the game. Incredibly oppressive, incredibly difficult to deal with, and without taking a million damage, and just an excellent finisher for the deck. Obviously, because we play a deck with a lot of bounty, we need a lot of removals. So as far as the removals, I mean, it's going to change depending on the meta, but right now I've settled on 3 copies of Force Choke. We don't really care too much about making opponents draw a card, because if we it's very likely that if we reach to the point in the game where your opponent, where those extra cards are really going to be annoying, it's pretty likely to be a point where we get just so much more value. I mean, our late game is completely disgusting. We have, as I said, like 3 Grey Dragon, 3 Palpatine, 2 Walkers, 3 Vaders. Like, this was already considered in Spark of Rebellion to be one of the best late game, but the fact that we're playing Grey Dragon on top of all this is just disgusting. So our objective in the early stage of the game is really to survive. There's a lot of 3/5s in the current meta. So Force Choke, I feel like, is just a very well positioned card in the current meta. Sabine is still very powerful. Being able to one-shot the Sabine with such a cheap card is very good. And once again, the more removal we have, the more likely we're able to trigger our uh, our um, um, our bounty cards. Moving on, we got Open Fire, which is advantage of being more flexible, can shoot in on the ground or in space. Once again, we need removal to trigger our bounty cards, so just Open Fire is a great card as well. Overwhelming Barrage, I'm not going to introduce that card. It would be insulting to introduce that card. I think Barrage is even better in this deck than it is in the regular Vader deck, simply because of the ability to give +2/+2 to Bosque, because Bosque comes into play earlier with 4 attacks, which means that we can set up a Barrage at 6 fairly early on in the game, and that makes this card very, very good in this deck. 1 copy of Traders. So the reason why I don't want to play more copies of Traders is because then your opponents start getting just too much value from anti-upgrade. We already run a few upgrades in this deck. So I don't want to be punished if some people play anti-upgrades in the main deck. So if you play too many Traders, you can really get punished for that. And I don't want to run them in the sideboard, simply because if I'm running against anybody who's playing against a bounty boss deck, they're gonna have anti-upgrades in their sideboard. So it would make so Traitorous is most likely gonna get sided out. But one Traitorous in the sideboard against deck that don't run upgrade removal is still gonna be an excellent flexible card. Very powerful that I like to have. I think, in my opinion, almost every green deck should have just 1 copy of Traders in their sideboard on the main deck, just because that options having that options available is just incredibly powerful. Yeah, so this is basically it for the main deck. As you can see, it is very close to a Vader ramp green deck that we've seen in Spark of Rebellion, just integrating the bounty cards. And as you can see, the deck functions just so pretty well, even with if you're not drawing the bounties. But just having the option of having those bounties just makes the deck just that much better. So I think it's a deck that has the same qualities as the Vader deck, but has more options to deal with aggro. Notably, it has a leader that deploys earlier. It doesn't get blown out by Rival's Fall nearly as much, and all those factors, in my opinion, makes this deck a pretty powerful deck. And in my opinion, it is the best way to run Bosque at the moment with the card that we have. So now let's take a look at the sideboard. So in the sideboard, we played 2 copies of Daring Raid. That is going to be extra removal against deck that play a lot of low health units, a unit with 2 health and stuff like that. Daring Raid is going to be useful for that, of course. We can also combine Daring Raid with Bosque ability to take out units that have 3 health if the unit has a bounty in it, just to make our bounties a bit easier to trigger. Then we got the Disabling Fang Fighters, which are going to be our anti-upgrades that we're going to be running, notably against the Boba Fett's armor, that kind of thing. Disabling Fighters is going to be an excellent card to see. The cool thing with Disabling Fang Fighter is like it's one of the cards that we can actually search from Bounty Hunter queries. So even though we only have 2 copies, the fact that we can get them from Bounty Hunter queries increases our chance of being able to hit them in the matchup where they matters. 2 copies of Papas's Return for the grindy, slowing matchups. I feel like Papa's Return is kind of going to be an auto-include in all sideboards for green-black. It is just a much better version of Emperor's Legion. Your ability to bring back all those powerful late game units is just going to be incredibly oppressive in those matchups. And notably, get a discount as well on Palpatine and Vader is also going to be super appreciated. 2 copies of Relentless, that's for the hard control matchups. Uh, and then the Devastator for the more mid-rangey control decks like the Krennics, the new Kira decks, all those things, the slower decks that we want to have bigger guns against them. The Devastator is going to help tremendously in that as well. And that's it for the deck. So you might wonder why. Obviously, there's plenty of cards. So we're going to talk about the few cards that I think could have been included into this this set. So I'll go into it. So one of them is going to be the so first there's the Gamorrean Guard, which is another card that really helps you stabilize the early game. That could be a good addition to this deck. The reason why I decided to not include it is because I do not really play that many early game green units. As you can see, only a Seasoned Short Trooper, but that's not really what you want to play on turn 2. Ideally, you want to play Gamorrean Guard in a deck where you play a lot of 3-drop that is green, that is non-Sentinel. So the idea is you go Gamorrean Guard turn 1, and then you basically play a green unit on turn 2 that doesn't have Sentinel in order to turn on a Sentinel, and that's really good. The problem is like basically the only green unit non-Sentinel that we have a 3-drop is gonna be a Super Laser Technician. So Gamorrean Guard is okay in this deck, but it's not amazing, so decided to not include him. Then the Blackstone Starfighter is another card that is always great to have if you're playing a deck that has Vader the unit in it. But I just felt like in this specific deck, the Punishing one was a better 3-drop in space, and I think playing both of them would be just a little bit too many. There's a world where you can go for a 2-2 split where you run like half Punishing one, half Black Sun Starfighter, but that's just it seems to be just a little bit too many 3-drops in my opinion. I can see a world where in a very aggressive meta I would maybe prefer Black Sun, but against almost anything else, Punishing one is going to be the better card. Reputable Hunter is a card that makes sense in a bounty deck. The thing is, our deck really plays very few bounties, only 6 of them, 9 if you count the Stone and Landspeeder. The card is pretty okay if you do run bounties, but if you do not run bounties, if you don't have any bounties, then the card becomes pretty bad. I think the main advantage of Reputable Hunter is if you can play it on turn 1, like you can play a 3-4 for 2 turn 1, but in this deck you can never do that because you don't have any 0 resources bounties. So in this case it's simply just not a very good card. Okay, so Jango Fett, I've basically cooled off a lot on that card. Basically without bounty the card is mediocre at best. It's if you don't draw your bounty, and this is what I was explaining with the problem with the bounty deck is that you get your bounty payoffs and your bounty cards, and sometimes it's not always easy to get your payoffs at the right moment. So I prefer to basically run no card that is conditional like this, run only the bounties that I need, synergize them with my Bosque, and that's it. I don't think Jango Fett is a good card, generally speaking. I think it's just too conditional. It can be very strong in some situation, but the deck building change that you have to make in order to make this card, in order to get the best out of this card, is just too high, and it makes the card just not so good. Christian is basically the same problem as for Bosque, as for Django, but even worse, because I think the card is not even that good if you do get bounties. The 3/7 that comes into play ready, it's okay, but then the attack ability doesn't matter the first time you attack with it. Once again, it's just there's just too much that needs to happen for Christian to be good. So yeah, Christian hasn't been an amazing card in my opinion. Okay, Restless Raider is a much bigger consideration. The reason why I went against it is because I've decided to run a 30 HP base instead of a 25 HP instead of ECL. I think that with ECL, Restless Raider has the great quality of one-shotting potentially a fire spray, which I think is very valuable. But outside of this, I found Restless Raider to be often just a big space unit. It's okay, but it's not like needed for the deck, I feel like. I would rather just reinforce my ability to stay alive by playing some Interceptor rather than playing a card that really doesn't impact the game as much as you would like whenever you reach that stage of the game. Deathmark is another bounty that slower controlling bounty based deck like to add because of the card advantage value, and the double trigger with Bosque is pretty amazing. But as far as experience, I don't feel like this is the kind of deck that really wants to do card draw. As you can see, our curve is extremely high. We play a lot of very expensive units. And in the sideboard, in grindy matchup, I would just rather be playing more powerful units instead of just integrating card draw into my deck. So personally, I find Deathmark to be a little bit unneeded. I think Deathmark is great if you're running an aggro deck that needs some card draw, because the aggressive version of boss can run out of cards very quickly, but this version does not run out of card and doesn't need card draw. And that's it. That's it for the potential card. Now let's go into a few mulligans. So okay, first hand. Okay, this hand is honestly very good. If you are playing against an aggressive deck, we can go Kylo, TIE Silencer turn 1, and then turn 2 Faith 3. And probably resource the Stolen Land Speeder and the price on your head. If you're playing in something that is not aggressive, then you can go Stolen Land Speeder, ping the Stolen Land Speeder, then play the price on your head on turn 2, finish off the Stolen Land Speeder. You end up with a 4-3 on the board, and you've ramped, which is pretty nice. So this is a very solid hand. I would definitely keep that. Okay, the second hand here is also very good. We got ourselves a turn 1 play. With a turn 2, this is a deck that is incredibly dependent on ramp, and just like the Vader deck, multiple ramp is definitely not something that is bad in this deck. So here I would definitely keep this hand. Once again, against aggro, we can go Kylo, TIE Silencer turn 1, then turn 2 Punishing 1. And then in any other matchup, we can go turn 1 Silencer or turn 1 Short Trooper, then turn 2 Resupply. Okay, so this hand is missing a turn 1 play, so I would not be keeping a hand like this personally. Not like the deck can play without ramp, but I feel like, yes, ramp is nice, but the deck plays 12 ramp in total, so it doesn't need... it's very likely that you're going to be drawing a ramp if you are mulliganing, so in this case, I would definitely mulligan to try to get a turn 1 play. Okay, so this new hand is much better. As you can see, we can go Stolen Land Speeder, then ping, get ourselves a 4-3, and then on a turn after, we can play either Resupply or Super Laser Technician. Definitely gonna resource one of those open fire, and depending on the matchup, might also resource this Interceptor. Okay, this additional hand is very strong. Once again, very good against aggro. We got a turn 1 play, got a turn 2 play. And if you're going again playing as something that is not aggressive, we can go price on your head, turn 1, Super Laser Technician turn 2, and then hopefully we find some. Then we can start pinging. We can ping the unit right from the turn 1. We can start pinging the card that we put a price on his head on, and then using Bosque ability, and then we can attack Super Laser Technician into the unit that has price on the head, and this way we can go for a double ramp. And get very quickly into those Vaders and stuff. Okay, last hand here. Okay, this hand is very weird. I would probably mulligan a hand like that. If you put I guess, yeah. No, this hand has no ramp at all. So a hand that has no ramp is simply not good unless you're playing against aggro. I guess against aggro this is not a horrible hand because we can go turn 1 Force Choke if your opponent opens on the ground. If your opponent goes to space, we can go Punishing 1. But even against aggro, it's not an amazing hand. And last, okay, this sounds pretty good. Once again, Stolen Land Speeder double ping to get it on. Turn 2 Resupply, or Punishing 1 depending if there's pressure on us. And then the rest, we can keep this Great Dragon, try to ramp into it. Anyway, this is it for this this video. I hope you guys have a better idea on how to run this deck. And if you are a big fan of Bosque, I think this is in my opinion the strongest Bosque deck that I've seen and that I've played with. So if you like Bosque, I think this is something you should give that you should give a try too. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as usual, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you need personalized help on your deck building or gameplay, feel free to book a training session on my coaching schedule. Thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time.